Hey, son, living the F1 life, is that it? Traveling around the world, big time differences, what, 13-hour flights, 17-hour time differences? What was
Yeah.
that like?
Tiring, I guess. I don't know how these teams and drivers do it every week. It's crazy.
Yeah, Brazil was a fun race and we couldn't even record. We couldn't work out the time, but that's interesting. That was a fun race, Brazil. The Alonso defense, Alonso versus Perez, McLaren did so well. The becoming all too typical Charles Leclerc heartbreak was a fun race, but we're going to do Vegas for this episode. All right, son, you ready to go?
I am ready to go.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, the American take on Formula One. We are recording the Las Vegas Grand Prix episode, Waking Up in Vegas. I've been telling the F1 world all year, we all have, Patrick, you and I, Hard Compound, that the Las Vegas Grand Prix was going to be awesome. Bright lights and glitz of Vegas. That super long straight was awesome. That night desert air, fast track. And I got to say, as much as we talked it up, that race exceeded my expectations. Amazing drive from Leclerc. Got P2. That overtake in the final lap against Sergio. Maybe Ocon's best drive of the year. Logan may have secured his spot for year two. And Lance Stroll. He's not been looking too good lately. He did well. Patrick, son, can I get your take on the Las Vegas Grand Prix?
Yeah, I mean, you said waking up in Vegas, more like no sleep till Vegas. We had a late night race out on the West Coast, so East Coast even later. But it was awesome. Great race. Tons to talk about. So many good performances, horrible performances, lots of craziness, lots of chaos, lots of luck, as you would expect in Vegas, lots of bad luck, as you might also expect in Vegas.
Yes.
But it was a lot of fun. I agree. It exceeded my expectations. I fully expected it to be awesome and fun and exciting, and it was better than that. So
Yeah. I'm going to, I think, start audio recording my column. So this is on, not surprisingly, the Las Vegas Grand Prix. And I got a little nasty on this one. Here we go. It's the inaugural Las Vegas Grand Prix, and every F1 adjacent content creator knocking down every F1 influencer wannabe, all in a mad dash to one up the last. They couldn't say enough bad about this race. They were hoping for failure because in the digital world, failure sells. But it was not to be. Las Vegas will be the premier F1 race on the calendar. That's guaranteed. More fun than Brazil, more nasty than Silverstone, more glitz than Monaco even, and better racing than Monza. Those bright lights, that super long straight, this race is already iconic. And it's the brightest signal yet that F1 belongs in America. Son, you remember? We used to get up early, turn on NBC Sports, watch the tape delay race, if it was shown at all. Now there are 3 races in the United States, and Vegas will be the one race to rule them all. Yes, it was over the top, but that's Vegas. Max can pretend he hates it, even though the glitz of F1, and especially the glitz of Las Vegas, is what makes him a jet-setting multimillionaire superstar. And for this very first Las Vegas Grand Prix, we got nasty qualifying. Ferraris on pole, 8 teams in the top 10, controversy and heartbreak. That is Vegas. Vegas is now the global center of professional sports. We got the NFL, Super Bowl. We got Major League Baseball coming, NHL, the biggest and baddest sports books on the planet, and now F1, and it's guaranteed into at least the 2030s. But there is one thing wrong. You touched on this, son. The one thing wrong with the Las Vegas Grand Prix is the majority of Americans are sleeping while it's on. That cannot be. Yes, Vegas awakens at night, but not us hard-working, always grinding Americans. And just because European F1 fans are able to watch the Las Vegas Grand Prix while enjoying their morning coffee, that's not a valid reason. America races must be viewable by Americans. But overall, a great race. The end. Okay, Patrick, let me get your top 5 for Las Vegas Grand Prix.
top 5. what a race for some, disappointing for others. I think it has to go without question. Charles Leclerc had the best weekend overall in Vegas. He was on pole. He finished P2 in the race. And frankly, the way he drove, he should have finished P1. He was really unlucky, quite frankly, by a number of factors, but he was by far the best driver of the weekend.
I mean, people say, oh, what if Alonso had that car? What if Hamilton had that car? They'd compete wheel to wheel with Max. I think Charles is saying, you know what? If he had that car, that team, he'd compete wheel to wheel with Max.
Yeah, for sure. I think he would definitely compete. He is maybe not as tenacious as Max is, at least not in his current car. It's hard to be when you can't really win, but he is mega talented, one of the best drivers on the grid. And, sometimes he kind of screws it up himself, but more often than not, it's really through no fault of his own that, he doesn't really end up in the positions that he should.
Yeah, I mean, that very first turn, Max pushed him off track. And Charles didn't fight back. And I think a lot of people might say, well, Charles needs to man up. Charles needs to fight back. But, Max has a car where he's already won the championship. He can knock you off the lane. And there's essentially no recourse.
Yeah.
They can penalize him. So what? His car's faster. They can disqualify him from the race. He's already won the championship. Charles is fighting for wins, for points. Ferrari's only, I think, 4 points down from Mercedes. That's millions of dollars if they come in second, millions more. I mean, I think there's maybe a bit more tenacity in the tank. He just can't use it.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I thought far and away the best driver this weekend, which is exciting to see. I mean, he kind of is like the poster boy for glitz and glamour. I feel like Ferrari team grew up in Monaco. So it's sort of fitting that in Vegas he had that kind of performance. Then I have Ocon. I thought, Gasly way out qualified him, his teammate. Ocon showed up in the race. He did everything he needed to do, got a little bit of help from some of those safety cars, but, he managed his tires well, battled with everyone he needed to do, and ultimately ended up in the top 5, I think. Pretty impressive drive from him. Then I have Lance Stroll. You mentioned him earlier on the top. He has kind of been nowhere for most of this season. All of a sudden, in Vegas, he shows up, kind of dominates things for that Aston Martin team. And, an impressive drive from him, sort of ensuring Aston, with some bad performances from McLaren, can kind of keep their hopes alive for a P4, in the constructors. Then I have a Red Bull, but not Verstappen. I think Perez had a better performance than him. Really not a great qualifying. Perez has not been good in qualifying throughout the season, but he showed up in the race. Even before any of the safety cars, he was looking like he was going to hunt down the pack and really kind of took it to everybody until he got to those top 2. And then, it was really pretty obvious that Leclerc and Verstappen were on a little bit of a different level from Perez, but he came through the pack, ended up on the podium, couldn't quite stave off Leclerc, but overall a really solid drive from him. And then finally I have Piastri.
Oh, I'm surprised.
The McLarens were shit, I guess. They were really bad on this track. He basically just kind of stayed the course, minded his own business, and ended up in a points position by the end of the race. Nothing exciting, nothing glamorous, but sometimes that's all you need in order to, secure your team a win throughout the season. So
nice. So you have Charles, Esteban, Lance Stroll, Sergio Perez, Oscar Piastri. Yep, I think that's a good list. For me, it's Vegas, and the story of this race was redemption. Charles showing us what he can do. Ocon reminding us he belongs in F1. He's talented. He's been in mid-pack cars pretty much his whole career, but he's a solid driver. Logan, like we mentioned before, may have done enough to get him into that seat for next year. And Lance Stroll, reminding us that even though he's there because his dad owns the team, he can still drive an F1 car. And you were right. That McLaren, I mean, after weeks of actually competing with Ferrari and Mercedes, they just looked bad. I mean, Lance had that spin out. I'm not sorry, not Lance, but Lando, but they didn't look great the whole weekend. So, yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. Oscar getting points was probably a good thing, but that was a big come down after weeks of really, taking it to Ferrari and Mercedes, if not quite taking it to Red Bull. What was your best surprise of the Las Vegas Grand Prix?
We saw the track layout. We heard, it was going to be a cold night. It was going to be tough on tire warm up and graining issues, big long straights. Kind of just expected the Red Bulls to drive off into the distance. That didn't really happen. We had close battles going on throughout the race, even for that top spot for the podiums. P4 through P10 was all pretty close. I think this was the most overtakes in any race this season except for the Dutch Grand Prix. So we saw some really good racing, good battles. It was a lot of fun. I think this ended up being a lot more interesting, a lot closer, and a lot tougher of a race than most people had expected. So for me, I guess that was the biggest surprise, best surprise.
Nice, nice. For me, I guess it's Sergio locking up P2. Lewis looked like a threat, and Lewis has been racing so well, even if his qualifying hasn't been great. And it looked like he had a chance of taking P2 this year, which against that Red Bull car would have been something else. But it wasn't easy for Sergio, like we said before. I mean, he's being forced to live amongst the wolves, and he hasn't gotten devoured yet. Although it's come close. So seeing him take P2, I was actually happy for him, and a little bit surprised. Mercedes did well, but yeah, they kind of let that slip away. I think they did have that within their grasp of taking, of somehow snatching that P2. But I was happy for Sergio. Biggest disappointment for me, I'm going to go first. There's 4 drivers who can, in next week's race, the final race, who can wind up being 4th after Max, Sergio, Lewis. Then there's several drivers who have a legit shot at showing up as 4th. We had 8 teams in the top 10 starting on position at the Vegas Grand Prix. So there was a lot of overtakes. Charles took 2nd place on the final lap. It was great fun. But this is another win for Max Verstappen, another win for Red Bull. People can say, oh, Charles can't finish a race. I mean, he's had, 11 poles, never won when he's had pole. But I just don't want us to sort of relive those Mercedes years where, I mean, year after year, it was like, well, Mercedes is going to win. And when it was Lewis versus Bottas, it was almost always Lewis is going to win. And when it was Lewis versus Nico Rosberg, it was like, well, one of those two at Mercedes is going to win. That went on for years. When I look at a lot of this stuff happening in Vegas, the overtakes, the fight for second, now after a 20-plus race season, there's 4 drivers who can come in 4th. That's all good. And I don't want to take anything away from Max. He's great. Christian Horner has that Red Bull team just firing on all cylinders. Every other team needs to step it up. But that car is lights ahead of everyone else. I don't want to see a season like this next year where it's like, look, one driver is going to win everything, and then it's all a battle for second. And I got to say, when Max sort of, even though he knocked Charles off on that first turn, it was, it's like, well, even if they give him 5 seconds, it's not really going to matter. Even if they have him give the place back, which I think they should, instead of just doing the 5-second penalty, I think that they should. I was like, this is going to be too easy. We don't want this. As fans don't want this. We want to see the best. And I think right now Max is the best. I think right now Red Bull is the best. Every other team needs to step it up. But when one team, one driver is lights ahead of everyone else, it's a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think for most people, most neutral fans or most fans of other teams, even some fans of Red Bull, they probably want to see more interesting races for that top spot. Makes the sport more exciting, makes the sport better, makes everything more interesting. So I agree, we don't just want one team to be overly dominant for years. there should be parity up and down the grid, not just, from P4 to P10.
Right. We don't want just, competing over second and third, then fourth and fifth, then 6 through 10. I mean, I do, like I said, I think the cost cap is going to breed parity. I think the regulations will. I just think Max is such a great driver, and Red Bull has got it all worked out that sort of just put them well ahead of everyone else. So we may have another year or two where it's, what's going to be second through 9.
Yeah.
Which that's fun. I mean, we like to watch all the teams, all the drivers, but if they can figure out a way of actually competing for P1, that'll be fun. Any other disappointments?
My big disappointment, I guess you already touched on it, is all the negative talk about Las Vegas, about the race, about the whole weekend, even after the race, which was fun and exciting. And, there's still haters that won't acknowledge that because they just want to fucking hate about something. It's really disappointing to me to see that, like, it really doesn't matter how good something is. People will just criticize it because they get interaction from that. That's really frustrating to me because I think this is a really good thing for the sport. It's a good thing for F1 in the US. It's a good thing for American fans. So it's disappointing to see that people are trying to take that away or bring it down. Obviously, like you mentioned, there's some disappointing things about the race, about how it was organized, about the promoters, whatever. And you can focus on that and criticize that. But I think on the whole, this was a good race. It's a good event. It's worthwhile continuing to operate like this.
Yeah. I don't want to gloss over the negative. It's more that there was so much negative leading up to this race and at the start and in practice that I just don't want to, really sort of give them any more ammunition. Just before the race, Netflix had this sort of little outing. It's several of the F1 drivers and some top golfers doing a kind of a little mini golf tournament. Now, Netflix is worth $200 billion. Liberty Media that owns F1 is worth about, I don't know, between 10 and 20 billion, let's say. Netflix is worth 200 billion. Netflix is desperate to get into live sports streaming. I mean, it was a fun little golf outing. Lando was there, Gasly was there, but they had some difficulties. They had a lot of difficulties, and this was a small scale event. I mean, what F1 pulled off for Vegas, I mean, I just think it was pretty impressive, all things considered. Everything could have gone wrong, and very little did. So, speaking of that, who do you think what belongs up on the virtual podium, Patrick?
I just liked how some of the drivers, most of the teams really embraced the excitement, the culture surrounding Vegas and the Grand Prix with all their sort of one-off car liveries, helmet designs. I thought they were a lot of fun to see how creative some of the drivers could be, some of the teams could be, and then, showcasing some of the artists that do all the work for them. I thought that was really cool, really fun to see for this race.
Yeah, that was good. I like those silly driver introductions. I thought those are fun. For the folks who watched the pre-race show, they had Danica Patrick and Martin Brundle, part of the Sky team, do a hot lap. I think they were in Mercedes. I've not forgotten. And they took turns. And it was fun because those two, they like to have fun, they like to chat, they like to smack talk. And they were doing that. But every now and again, because the camera was on them, when they were driving, when they were the driver, they were focused. They were locked in. And it's just a hot lap. They're not like actually racing or anything. I really got a kick out of that. All right, switching to the soft compound. Something I really liked, Patrick, was that cool down room, but it was an Uber where they had Max,
in the
Sergio,
like
Charles,
Rolls Royce Ghost or whatever the fuck
just
it
get
was.
into a car and like, oh, you're not going to the cool down room. We're going to put you in an Uber. And I was like, this is awesome.
I thought it was funny that they forced Max into the middle seat I'm like, dude just won a race and he's in the middle seat.
Funny, yeah, yeah. But I was like, oh yeah, they totally. I mean, they even joke like, hey, let's hit the casinos, let's hit the clubs. I was like, they absolutely should have just not even show up for the, you
Yeah.
know, for the trophies. Just like, we're heading out to the Wynn Casino, brother. Couple things I thought were interesting. One is at first I thought he was just joking, but apparently Lewis Hamilton is seriously going to cut an album. And I was like, man, I don't know who's talking to this guy. I realize he's got a lot of money and he's one of the all-time great F1 drivers. But please, Lewis, do not do this. Do not do this.
Yeah, that's a weird one. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's going to listen to that.
Let's hope not. Let's hope not. And I say that with love. I say that with love. Something I saw, there's a company called Foresight Research. They did a study, not just on F1, but on races in America. So include NASCAR, IndyCar. And I was surprised by their numbers. They said, obviously, race fans are likely to be males. I get that. They're likely to be maybe a little bit better off. But more than 1 in 3 new car buyers who watch these races are somewhat significantly influenced over which car they buy and which car accessories. So all that advertising, it's worth it. And these auto companies already, they're part of F1. So we have Haas, which is auto accessories and products. We've got Mercedes. We've got Aston now. They're branded as Aston, Stroll's team. We can see that having a significant impact on sales. So it's probably no wonder that Ford is so eager to get back into this, Honda staying in it, GM hoping to get in it with Andretti. But the numbers, so it was a Foresight Research study. The numbers I thought were pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Advertising, it's a very interesting concept, lucrative market, it seems like. And, no wonder there's so many manufacturers and auto parts suppliers and whatnot that are trying desperately to either become sponsors or actually become, part of these teams, integrate into F1. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I saw Lance Stroll essentially bought Force India, pretty good price, about 100 million 5 years ago. He took that with Aston Martin and branded it Aston Martin, but that's now estimated to be worth $1 billion. The Mercedes team folks are saying at least $3 billion. I mean, that's some impressive numbers. Because we see, Martin's grid walks, all the stars, celebrities are out there. But yeah, it's not just, the celebrities wanting to be part of this. I don't know if we remember if we talked about this a few weeks ago, but a private equity company bought 24% stake in Alpine. And, these private equity companies are smart and they're like, hey, Ryan Reynolds or, some star, like, hey, we'll give you a piece of the action. You just sort of got to be the face of this because, everyone's going to pay attention. But yeah, it's not even just the celebrities and the private equity. It's the auto companies are seeing the value, and especially now the American auto companies. So that's really good. I mean, heck, it was 2 years ago, Honda again said they were leaving F1, but staying with Indy, just because the costs and what's the value of it. But I just think now the value is just off the charts. Here's some news while you were traveling around the world. Mercedes Chief Technical Officer Mike Elliott decided to spend more time with his family, Patrick.
Good for him.
What do we make of that? My guess is Toto and Lewis were like, yeah, this
Get
car.
the fuck out. Yeah, probably.
I mean, it's a tough business. This guy has a good track record, a solid track record. But I think they were looking around and saying, man, there's a cost cap. We can't protect your salary. You're probably, costing us the same as 10 engineers, maybe more. And this car is just not getting it done.
Yeah, that's reading between the lines. I don't think he made the decision to spend more time with his family.
Yeah,
It seemed like somebody else decided for him.
I think that's so. I mean, Lewis for a year and a half now has been very public.
Yeah.
He's really been bad mouthing this Mercedes car for a year and a half now. And who knows, that may have, when him and Toto were talking contracts, probably Lewis, because Toto's a money guy, but Toto likes everything to be nice and calm. He doesn't like controversy. He doesn't like conflict. My guess is Lewis was like, hey, man, I'm going to sign on this dotted line here. We got to make some changes.
Yep.
It was, I think, maybe a year ago when we talked about the Las Vegas race in '81. And before this show, before the new Las Vegas race, Ted Kravitz and the Sky Team did a little sort of Vegas history. It was real fun. Vegas history and the connection with F1. And, he mentioned Alan Jones winning the '81 Grand Prix, the Las Vegas Grand Prix way back in the day. But that got me thinking about, because Alan Jones won one world championship. But I think they said it was at the Las Vegas race that Alan Jones, former world champion, won. But Nelson Piquet, I think, got enough points to win the championship that year, which made me think, I think the '80s must have been peak F1 as far as just competition. I mean, you had Alan Jones won, Nelson Piquet, we had Senna,
Prost.
Prost. Yeah, I mean, it was just, that was quite a decade.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, right now, Lewis and Alonso are, at the tail end of their career. So right now it's just Max. But if Charles could win, well, this could match it, having Max, Charles, Lewis, Alonso all on the grid at the same time. We could be heading toward a sort of a new golden era as far as race driver ability, status, achievement.
Yeah, I think, it's hard to match the kind of development that we saw in the '80s in terms of actual teams where, the cars were so different from each other. And really, on any given track, one of the teams could win. We mentioned how dominant Red Bull has been this season and the past few seasons. And before that, it was Mercedes for many, many years. Makes it challenging for there to be multiple world champions all driving on the grid at the same time. So if we get back to something where, it's not just dominated by one team, there could definitely be, I think, several champions on the grid at once. If we see, guys like Lando and Piastri and Leclerc, like you mentioned, Verstappen, if there's parity up and down the lineup, we could see all these guys at some point win a world championship. I think they're all talented enough. So that would be really cool to see.
I agree. Now, let's ask the stewards. In this instance, you're the steward. So General Motors, through Cadillac, is trying to be an engine manufacturer with the 2026 regulations. And going forward, they're working with the Andretti team. It looks like that bid will go through, but, politics and money, folks wanting to make sure they all get their cut. So it's not a done deal, but it looks like it's going to happen. Looks like Audi will be involved. I think they'll just sort of outright take over the Alfa Romeo. Not sure, but I think so. We don't know what about the AlphaTauri if Red Bull sells them off. So it looks like with the next batch of regulations, the new engine regulations starting in 2026 or thereabouts, we could have Mercedes, Ferrari, Ford through Red Bull, Renault, which is Alpine, Honda, GM, Audi, all involved. I mean, it just sort of like, it seemed for a while. Remember when Christian Horner was going begging for an engine because Renault just wasn't getting it done and he couldn't get Mercedes. He didn't really want to do Ferrari. I mean, he had to sort of keep Honda and cut a deal with Honda. This is pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how all these engine manufacturers, how these OEMs are deciding to get back into the sport finally. I think it's been a long time coming, and I think it's really a valuable proposition for a lot of them. I think we've been talking about, Ford and GM, these American auto manufacturers to get involved for a long time. And it seems like finally they've decided that now is the time that it's worth it to make a push to get into F1.
Yeah. And, even Indy legend Roger Penske, I mean, he was at the Vegas Grand Prix, probably just having fun, but you never know. I mean, the guy essentially was in F1, now essentially owns Indy Race. It's amazing. The American companies, everybody really wants a piece of F1 now. Across the line, that is where we predict the top 5 for the next race. The next race is Abu Dhabi, which last year Max won. Charles came in second. I believe it was Red Bull, Ferrari, 1, 2, 3, 4. Not sure, but I think it was. Now, in across the line, we each choose who we think is going to be in the top 5. If we're right, we get a point for each driver. If we get them in the exact spot, we get 3 points because Patrick was jetting around the world. We didn't do predict for Vegas, I don't think. But what are the standings to date, Patrick?
Yeah, minus Brazil, or I guess minus Vegas, sorry. Standings with one race to go are me, 74, you, 71.
Ooh.
3-point difference.
Ooh, with
That
one
is
race
just
to go.
one driver in the correct position.
Oh, very nice. Nice, nice. Abu Dhabi, the final race of the year, and we come down 7-4-7-1. This is how F1 needs to be, Patrick.
It is, yes. It
All
is.
right, who goes first?
I go first.
Oh, I trust you.
I have to take the one man who's won, 18 races this season?
Yeah, every American race, pretty much every race.
Crazy. I
It,
got to
it
take
actually has been.
Max. I got to
It's been
take
amazing.
Max.
Yeah, I knew you would. I'm
Look, this
taking
is it.
Charles.
This is the end. I got to make sure, secure my second championship.
Not only am I taking Charles in P1, I'm taking Carlos in P2.
Dang, P1, P2. Fine, and I'm taking Sergio in P2.
Ooh, it's a
I
Red
mean,
Bull.
he's got to get there at some point, right? He keeps getting passed on like the last fucking lap. Like,
I
what's
know,
the
I
guy
know,
got to do?
I know. But dang, that Alonso Sergio battle in
That
Brazil,
was good.
that was good. That was good. That was more fun than Charles overtaking Sergio in Vegas this weekend. But yeah, that was a battle.
In both cases, I just assumed Perez would come out on top. Just, it's a better car. He's a good driver, whatever. And, Charles and Alonso, they're scrappy. They know how to work a car. So it's impressive.
It was very good. All right, so you've got who do you got third?
Abu Dhabi. Let me go Lewis Hamilton.
Oh, damn. You're bringing out the big guns. Max, Sergio, Lewis. I've got Charles, Carlos, and I said Las Vegas this year. The story was redemption. It was not, though, for George, who I think fell asleep a couple times. I'm going to go George Russell in third. Mm-hmm. And in fourth, I'm going to go Pierre Gasly.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's a big one. Let's see. I think that it's going to be a tight battle this last race between McLaren and Aston. I think McLaren is going to secure P4 in the constructor standings. I'm going to take Lando Norris P4.
Okay. Good.
But hot on his tail is Fernando Alonso.
Ooh. Yeah, it wasn't a great race for Fernando this week, but it was fine race. So you've got Max, Sergio, Lewis, Lando, and Fernando. I have Charles, Carlos, George, Pierre Gasly, and I'm going to take the other McLaren driver, young Oscar Piastri. Any crazy predictions for the final race of the year, Patrick, or the off season?
I have one maybe not so crazy prediction. Bit sad. I think Abu Dhabi is going to be Fernando Alonso's final race in Formula One. I think he will not ever race again in F1.
I would not be surprised by that, but that is sad. He's just been there for so long.
I know.
So many different engine regulations, so many different cars, so many different tracks, more laps than anyone. Well, that'd be sad. We'll just sort of have Lewis will be the only one left from the old school. My guess is going to be a bittersweet, crazy prediction for this episode. Mine is somewhat similar, and that is in the off season, F1 announces, given how grand and glitzy and good the Las Vegas Grand Prix was, and how it's probably going to be sort of become the cornerstone for the high glamour, all out, big media, blitz race that, hate to say it, but I think they're going to announce an end date for Monaco. It won't end in 2024, probably not even 2025, but I can see with the new regs, the new cars in 2026, because you just can't really race. Like I said,
Yeah.
it's basically qualifying and then a ceremony.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking the end.
Unless you're Ricardo and your team fucks up a tire change, but
Right. Oh yeah. Right. Oh man. That's tough. All right. I want to remind our listeners, send your questions or comments to heartcompoundpod@gmail.com. We may read them on the show. We definitely will read them. And I wish to thank you all for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. And we are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Good show, son. And I'm glad you're back. I was clearing out my browser history, clearing out my cache. When you get to be my age, you never know what's going to happen. And you don't want your loved ones to come and see what your browser history is. And I was surprised as I was going through it. There was at some point, I was reading up and bookmarking every article on these like kind of weird whole new world of pickling, of like just like pickles with Kool-Aid, pickling with lemon juice, pickling beets, pickling cauliflower, pickling Brussels sprouts. There's a whole world opened up to me. That and other stuff that we can't mention, son.